Hello, and welcome to the Gamechanger podcast hosted by Kitman Labs. In this podcast, we discuss everything from sports teams and sports science to cutting-edge technology. At Kitman Labs, we are passionate about sharing knowledge, experiences, and research with the worldwide community of sports professionals. We will hear from leading experts in their field who will be providing evidence-based advice and first-hand experiences from working with world champion athletes, teams, and coaches. This episode of The Gamechanger is hosted by Kitman Labs performance scientist John Dans. John has worked for over 20 years in professional sport and held various positions in elite rugby teams as the head of performance, including the New South Wales Waratahs and the Premiership rugby side Harlequins. He has also worked as a strength and conditioning coach for Leicester Tigers and Wellington Rugby. In his role with Kitman Labs, John works with teams all over the world, helping them to unlock valuable insights from their data that will enable better health and performance of their athletes.
Welcome to the Gamechanger podcast. My name is John Dams. I'm a performance scientist for Kitman Labs, and today I'm joined by guest Jay Hedley. Jay is the managing partner of the prestigious coaching room based in Sydney, is a performance coach, executive coach, and is passionate about awakening people to their true potential and helping them to engage with and relate differently to themselves. The coaching room is a company which works with high-performance leaders, athletes, sports coaches, and their teams to help them unleash their full potential. In this role, he works with executives and leaders of global companies such as Fiji Airlines, KPMG, and has worked extensively with Rugby Australia, New South Wales Rugby, the Waratahs, and now with Red Bull Formula One Racing. So welcome, Jay. So in your own words, can you explain to the listeners a little bit about your communication model and why it would play a part in high-performance sport?
Hey John, how you going? The communication model you're referring to is called an NLP communication model, and some of the listeners might have heard of NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. It plays a key role in the kind of coaching that we do, which is called developmental coaching, which transcends and includes NLP and goes, much deeper. The communication model maps out how we communicate primarily, firstly, with ourselves, and then how that plays out with others. It's a developmental model because it maps the structures of the self, of the personality or the ego, and shows how they're created and how they are maintained, and from there, how we get ourselves in the way from doing what we know how to do. It's one of the things that's really kind of arisen for us recently in working with global leaders, definitely in my experience and the thousands of people that I've coached, is that most of the leaders I coach, most of the athletes that I work with or the coaches that we work with, most of them know what to do, Johnny. They just aren't doing it. And the reason that they're not doing it is because they're getting their self in the way. That is, they're getting their own communication style. They're communicating from their communication style or through their communication style to other people's, and they're not communicating to other people's communication styles. So therefore, they're not getting a depth of rapport that builds and surpasses the trust and care that is required for another human being to open up and be present to them. As a result of that, they're having difficulties in their conversations, difficulty communicating what it is they intend to communicate. So yeah, that forms the basis of what we do. And then looking at that, we look at the structures that surround that and together begin to pull them apart and, if they need to, put them back together, or, if they're ready to not have those structures running anymore so that they can be free and fluid to fully be themselves without concerning themselves about what other people think of them and whether they should be saying something differently or doing something differently. They're just fully there, available with everything that they are available to them in the moment.
Okay, I mean that makes sense to me. It sounds like a really interesting approach. So you're deploying this model across high performance sport and in corporate environments. What kind of response are you getting from these? I mean, it's a slightly different approach than maybe traditional communication models. So what kind of response are you getting from the athletes, coaches, the high performance executives?
It's really interesting, and our approach, as you mentioned, it's different. It really is different from anything that most people have seen. An example of that is that one of the things we reveal to people is that winning and losing are the same thing. They're just different sides of the same coin. If you are so invested in one of them, i.e. winning, then quite often you'll miss the really obvious learning ability and capacity to learn from your loss. One of the things we did with Waratahs Rugby extensively is talk with them about the coaches, to the CEO there, Andrew Hoare, and to the players about genuinely learning how to lose. And that is learning from your failures so that you integrate those learnings so that there's no need for the behaviours to show up again, because you've taken what's required out of the experience and allowed the rest to drop into the background as you integrate that and take your performance to the next level. So actually losing becomes the most intensive way of learning about yourself as an individual and as a collective team. And when you integrate the learning from that, you can't lose, you can't fail. It's a bit like Bruce Lee's inevitable punch. If he's going to hit you, he's going to hit you. There's nothing you can do about. Well, this is doing that in an individual and a team-based sporting endeavor where performance is critical and paramount, but the fear of failure isn't. Fear of failure is one of the structures that gets in the way and stops people from performing, as you know, Johnny.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that's maybe ingrained in a number of athletes, through their development as young athletes into professional sportsmen and women. How do you break down those kind of consistent habits and consistent barriers around understanding that fear of failure? Because for some athletes that may be a motivator in some way. How do you break that down?
Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head. It is a motivator. In fact, it's their primary motivation system. One of the things I see with lots of teams is there is a culture of needing to beat yourself up after a loss. And, you're not only pouring fuel onto the fire, but you're lighting the match. And, it's customary and it's not unusual for teams to sit in a dressing room, in stark silence, making no eye contact with anyone else as you pay penance for apparently what you've done. Whereas the really high performance teams come together after that event and go, okay, that was shit. What did we learn? What are we going to take away from this? How and what are we going to work on? And how are we going to make sure that we never, ever experience this again? And so everybody does some soul searching, but also looks at how can they be different? What is it that they need to learn from this experience? What could they learn from the events? What could they learn from their approach? What can they learn from their mindset? What can they learn as a team, as an individual, to grow from this experience so that the pain becomes gain? It's their values and beliefs that are maintaining that way of being. That's what we work into. We identify what are the core beliefs and we challenge them. What are the core values and we challenge them.
I mean, I've been in that changing room. I've been in a team who've come off the pitch with a difficult performance. I've been involved as an athlete and as a coach. I mean, I can see that and I can rationalise that. Does it take a certain athlete or a certain intelligence to be able to change those ingrained beliefs about what should happen after a game like that?
Well, it takes them seeing what they're doing first and foremost. We can't change what we're not aware of. So a leader needs to be objective to the culture if they're going to lead it. Because if they're subject to it, the culture is leading them, not the other way around. They've got to be able to step back and point at the culture and inquire with people about, about why does this culture exist, and is it really working for us? Is it enabling us to be be our potential, to fulfill our potential? A leader needs to be able to challenge that. I don't think it's necessarily intelligence, because there's not one intelligence, there's some 24 intelligences. So to say, are they intelligent enough? Some of the players don't have what you might call a high level of cognitive intelligence, but they have got, incredible spatial intelligence. They've got very high quality somatic or body intelligence. They might have low emotional intelligence, but they have other intelligences that make up for it. And so it's appealing to them through their intelligences in a way that they can understand and make meaning out of what it is that a coach is saying. So therefore, yes, a coach needs to be able to appeal to different people who like information in different ways, who like and process information in different ways. About a year ago, I wrote an article on this, and it came from the work that I've done with Daryl Gibson, as I saw him, the head coach of the Waratahs, grow immensely over this year as an individual. He's really had the realization that the technical aspects of being a coach are probably about 25% of the work. The 75% of the work is understanding how human beings work and being able to connect in and plug in and facilitate the making of meaning in a powerful and engaging way with everybody he's talking to. And this has been the major shift in the way he's approached. And the team has risen to match his development through stepping into their development. And so it is in the challenging of the values, the challenging of the individual and the shared beliefs, which is the culture, the challenging of the behaviors, the challenging of the systems and processes that enables a leader to begin to identify in the culture what's working and what's absolutely not working, and what the hell we as a team are going to do about it, and invite then the team members themselves to be part of the process. They need to be able to take responsibility for their own development. It's about the coach learning how to communicate to them in a way that works for them.
Coming into a team like the Waratahs and understanding maybe the need to change the culture that is currently exists in the team, it starts from the top down, starts from board level, starts from head coach, and work your way down. How did you approach it from from a start point? Did it start with Daryl? Did it start with the players? How did you work that?
It started with Andrew Hoare, actually, the CEO there. And so it starts really with at that senior level, because the head coach is interacting with the CEO, and them getting clear on how they wanted to be together as really the leadership team of the players, and getting clear, very, very clear on what they wanted in terms of where they wanted the team to go, what was their vision for the team. And that was the turning point, was really identifying something that engaged the players from a meaning perspective that drove their performance. And so getting super clear on how they wanted to be together and what they wanted to achieve together as the leadership team. And then I worked with the rest of the executives, and then I worked with some of the players as they worked on some of their stuff. And it's not the players that just have the stuff. Every human being on the planet has stuff, Johnny, you know that. This is about them working on their stuff and getting their stuff out the way. So fear of failure was a really big one. Concerns about their performance, concerns about whether or not they were going to get picked, whether they were indeed, in their view, better than the other people that are getting picked ahead of them, the struggles, the challenges they had, getting themselves out the way so that they could truly be there on behalf of the team. So, working through becoming more collaborative and more connected rather than putting themselves first, learning to actually, not just say it, but actually put the team's needs first is a real turning point for a team. Teams talk about it, few do it.
we've talked a lot about communication. We've talked a lot about investigation into getting yourself out of the way in order to be a better athlete, a better coach, a better communicator. For those listeners who probably aren't familiar with Kitman Labs, in terms of that we're a technology company, we use performance data in order for coaches and scientists to get insights from their team's data. How would you see the use of performance data, the use of information in communication? How would you use it as a vehicle to improve your style of communication?
So and I do understand, you and I have had a few conversations, and I have done a bit of research, and I think Kitman really offers something that's a game changer in terms of the quality of data that's being provided. A high quality, really specific data enables us to have a different kind of conversation. It enables us to go past opinion. It enables us to go past culture. It enables us to transcend those things. It enables us to identify leverage points in the system and to have different dialogue that engages the players in what's really going on for them when this is happening, or what's really going on for them when that's happening, and then being able to inquire into the inside, the inner game of the athlete, that facilitates and creates the outer game of the athlete. So the data's about the outer game. The two internal powers that we have are thinking, and they're the movies we make in mind, and this is where NLP comes in, and the feeling, how our movies govern and code our mind, body, emotional states, and how our states ground our performance. And then behind all that, how we've done that with past selves habitually and created reference points for ourselves that are either empowering or disempowering. And an example of that, Johnny, is, let's say, the Wallabies are going to head over to play the All Blacks, and they're at Eden Park. Yeah, the first thing on their mind is going to be what?
It's Eden Park, and they haven't won in 50 years.
Right. So do you see? There's 50 years, you bastard. There's a reference point. Yeah, it's hard to win here. Now, that's not a terribly good mindset. Therefore, the reference point isn't terribly good to reference to help you make sense of what you're doing there, because what has Eden Park actually got to do with tonight's performance? Apart from it's a ground, it is the same size, the same shape, the same color, the same texture, the same ground as anywhere else in the world. Might be slightly different temperatures, might be a more hostile crowd for sure. But you see, if an athlete can learn to screen the crowd out and screen in only what's happening right in front of them, then the crowd doesn't have any bearing on the athlete whatsoever. And so that would be a reference point that would not serve them. Yet I can guarantee you that because it's all they talk about, hey, and the commentators will say, how do you go? We haven't won here in 21 years or 50 years, and they go, yeah, no, we're not thinking about any of that, which is bullshit. They're lying to themselves, and they're lying to the commentators, and they're lying to the general public. They are thinking about it. To be able to go, as a reference point, it's not terribly helpful. I'll tell you what we are thinking about. We are thinking about how we're going to win this game. And we are thinking about keeping our focus on who we need to be and what we need to do differently tonight to actualize that potential. Because we know we have the potential. We understand it. We know we have the game plan. And this is our focus is on how we execute that tonight. Thanks for the questions. Then it's talking to what's really going on, where our focus really is, rather than we don't want to talk about that because we don't think about it. And so, we're holding on to all these past reference points. That was just to give you an example. Even in business, leaders doing exactly the same thing that aren't very useful, actually. And so by bringing them into awareness and having different dialogue around those reference points and talking about what we are about and where our focus truly is, means that an athlete might not even know that they can screen out the crowd. They might not even know that that's possible. And so having conversations, developmental conversations about that sort of thing, that's the sort of stuff that is the difference that makes a difference, in our view.
So Jay, we've spoken about using data as a vehicle to a high quality conversation. Something we come across a lot from the back office is some of our sports scientists and some of our practitioners is they gather a huge amount of information, and their ability to convey this information and have effective conversations is difficult. Knowing your understanding and kind of what you've just explained to me there, is there anything you can talk to around optimizing how they use that information in terms of moving or having a conversation upwards in terms of manager, a coach, a CEO?
Yeah. So, well, first and foremost, that learning not to personalize conversations. They're not about you, they're not about them, they're about what happened. And that's where the data really helps us to depersonalize. And then really framing up the conversation is probably the most critical part. We call it pre-framing. So if I'm talking to somebody who has low ego strength, and I'm fairly certain that what I'm going to feed back to them, they're not going to like. Let's just say that's a scenario. And yet I also know that they need it fed back to them. Then putting it in a third person perspective in rational, logical, observable data like that you offer, enables us to depersonalize that. And so I might say, I want to have a conversation about some data that's come forward that is objective, that isn't in any way, shape or form judging you as a human being. It's looking directly at your performance. Let me just check in. Are you interested in using this conversation to improve your performance, Bob? And so Bob might go, yeah, of course I am. Well, the moment he says, yeah, of course I am, he's bought the frame that this is about improving his performance. And then I'll go, so in the vein of improving your performance, Bob, I'd like to share some different elements of the data. My mind read is that you may at some stage take some of this personally or go away and think about it and maybe even judge yourself over this. This is not the point of what why I'm having this conversation with you. The point of having this conversation with you is that you know that you aren't alone, but you have to do the work to uncover what's going on the inside, whilst we help you shift, change and adjust the outside. So you're not alone. We're here to work with you, and this is about you achieving your full potential, Bob. Let me just check in before we start. Is that okay with you that we have this kind of conversation about your potential here and about you stepping forward and leaning into you being the very, very best? Now, the moment that you get a yes, straight between the eyes. Yeah, don't hold back. Be direct. Speak to the facts. And so stay away from opinion. And that's good and that's great and I really like that. That's useless information. And so we're inviting the person to take responsibility and accountability, but the frames up front have allowed us to have a fierce or challenging conversation, which gives responsibility back to the person we're having the conversation with. Now, if we do see them starting to take things a little personally, then we've got to be able to have the courage to talk to that, to be able to go, so let me just stop you here, Bob, because it sounds to me, and I could be wrong, but it sounds to me like you're getting a little bit defensive. Can I check in what's going on for you? And Bob might say, yeah, I feel really attacked. And then I'm going to go back to the original frame that I said. This isn't about judgment, Bob. What makes you think you're being judged here? Well, it's just that all the information seems to be about what I'm doing wrong. And then I might say, okay, so I really appreciate you coming forward and sharing that with you. This isn't about right or wrong, Bob. This is about performance. And notice that what you haven't paid attention to is that if there is performance issues, pointing those performance issues out and fixing those performance issues is about you achieving your potential. Notice that you didn't reference that when you got defensive. And so we can really have different kinds of conversation. And the biggest shift from opinion. I don't agree with that. Okay, tell me what evidence do you have to put forward that shows from an evidence-based approach what you're disagreeing with. Well, I don't have any. Okay, so that I'm going to gather that's opinion then. Yes, it's my opinion. Well, you're welcome to your opinion, Bob. Until you've got some hard, concrete evidence to show us, we're going to go with the hard, concrete evidence we have in front of you. Is that okay? And that's really, it enables much fiercer, much more direct conversations, which coaches absolutely need to learn to be able to do, John, in order to be effective. If they can't have effective conversations that are fierce and go straight to the heart of things, then they're really going to struggle engaging people, because until the person can be with the truth of what's actually going on, and the data tells us the truth from an objective perspective, then they're not going to be able to integrate and therefore change what's going on, because their ego won't let them.
Now, I can imagine there are CEOs, there are general managers out there who are involved with the teams, who have information and who need to be able to drive performance from the top down. Could this type of conversation be had with a subordinate or someone in a management line? And how would it change, or would it be the same type of conversation?
The structure's the same, so framing the conversation prior to having it, why we're having the conversation, what's important about it, how do I suspect it might be taken, etc. So that structure's the same, but in a hierarchical management structure, there needs to be overt permission to have the conversation. And so the only difference in the pre-framing there would be for the subordinate to pre-frame that they'd like to have a conversation, and although they don't have the management authority to make any decisions here, that the decision isn't their responsibility to make, it's the manager's responsibility to make. They'd still like to challenge some thinking around that, yeah, and maybe potentially influence the manager's decision, but ultimately they realize that it's the manager's decision to make, not theirs, and they're not trying to convince the manager into changing their decision or making a different decision. They're simply exploring possibilities together and then inquiring with a permissive question like, would that be okay for us? Would that be okay for you? And then once that's been agreed to and the person goes, yeah, absolutely, like, I think it's a great idea, you carry on, then you just go straight to in the eyes, go fierce, go direct, keep it objective rather than subjective, keep your opinions to an absolute minimum, and talk to the facts, talk to what it is, and if you are creating an opinion, own it. This is only my opinion and I'm happy to be wrong, but here's the way I see it. Let me check in. And so the second component part is then seeking first to understand the other's perspective. So it's a conflict resolution model we have. It's called integral semantics. Rather than oppose you, what I'm going to do is I'm going to inquire into the thinking you've done behind your perspective so that I can out-argue your perspective for you. Now that gives me two perspectives. And if you're not inquiring into my perspective, then you've only got one perspective, yours. If I can see two perspectives, now I can triangulate and I can take a third perspective. Well, I'm at third person perspective and you're at first person perspective. Who do you think's got influence, Johnny?
I hear.
Having those kind of conversations is critical for an organization's success. Healthy conflict is very important. You need to be able to put it all on the table and talk it through. Hey.
Speaking to that, and speaking of owning your opinion, gut feeling. And as a coach, intuition and gut feel has been a part of coaching for, hundreds of years. Would you, in terms of if you have, as a coach, have a gut feel on things, would you use the frame, it's only my opinion and my gut feel? How would you communicate that?
So the words "in my experience," so are normally non-verbal, hand over the gut, And in my experience, but my gut tells me I'm on the right track here, that this is the way we should go. Now, I know it's not informed, and I know I don't at this point have the data, but here's what I'm going to ask of you. I'm going to ask you to go test it. Give your whole self to it. Give everything to my gut feel as your coach, and let's see if it works. And let's then pull the data apart and talk about, is my gut feel accurate? Yeah, and so you know, if you've got a gut feel, you need to be able to test it. And so, and this is one of the things we do with our business. The other managing partner in the business, with two managing partners in our business, and myself, three of us. One of the managing partners the other day said to me, you know, I've read this article and these people say this about marketing, and what do you think? And I said, why are you reading, you know, these type of articles, buddy? What are you looking for in the article that's not within you? And he said, well, I'm looking for answers because I don't have them. And I said, how do you know you don't have them? And there was just like silence there for a while. And I said to him, what does your gut tell you? And he said that the author of the article doesn't really understand what they're talking about. I said, so why do you continue to reference it, buddy? Yeah. And he said, but I don't know it for sure. And I said, how could you test it? How could you design a test that would enable you? And he said, I suppose go with my gut and you know, institute the things I want to institute and measure them. It's like, good job. Why are you talking to me then? So being able to test, you know, the gut really gives, because there's a lot of information in there, you know, that what we call instinct is simply experience over time that we've had and we've seen that culminate into a gestalt output that becomes greater than the sum of its parts. That is an integral part of coaching. It's an integral part of my coaching, Johnny, and it needs to be an integral part of all leaders and sports coaches' approach to facilitation.
Okay, so let's talk about, you know, it being part of a leader's toolbox. Now, some environments and even some companies that we work with won't have the resources to use it to hire their own developmental coach. What are the kind of steps they can use to begin this kind of change of culture, or this inward look at themselves for the better of their team and organization?
So all leadership starts with self-leadership. And so the organization may not be able to afford to hire a developmental coach or developmental program that is required for the organization, but it doesn't stop the leader from reaching out and getting the feedback on their blind spots that they need to work on first in order to be able to lead more effectively. So where everybody, in our view, developmentally needs to start is with themselves. And you know, that brings up a problem, and the problem, and we kind of voiced this about 5 years ago, and the way we voiced it is contentious, to say the least. So I'm going to voice it this way anyway. But go on.
No, you're going to voice it anyway. So great.
Yeah, I'm going to voice it anyway. Yeah. So it is your absolute success. Yeah, is your potential failing as a human being, and then you can flip that and go, your absolute failing is your potential as a human being. And what we mean by that is that the more successful people become, the less they keep looking at themselves and what it is they need to keep working on, because I become obsessed with the success and I become identified with the success. Now I am successful despite myself. Then I don't need to work on anything, because can't you see I'm successful? And the person, the human being, falls asleep to the stuff they need to work on, the interpersonal stuff, the relational stuff, the unconscious self-talk, the unconscious referencing of movies, of referencing of past events and memories, etc., that aren't serving them, that they're still running outside of conscious awareness, that's gotten them here, but eventually they're going to hit a ceiling with, and it's not going to get them there. And so, first and foremost, self-leadership, working on what do I need to work on myself, and starting to do the work of looking. An amount of that work that can be done alone, Johnny, but there is a vast majority of it that can't, because a human being cannot see what they cannot see. And so what we are blind to, we will continue to be blind to unless an event occurs which pulls back the curtain and reveals to us what we're blind to. Then we might have an awakening, but that's leaving your development up to the environment, which doesn't tend to be a very high quality strategy. A much better quality strategy is to find a developmental coach that is really skilled at identifying and facilitating you finding things you did not know existed in your thinking, from thinking patterns, in your languaging, your self-talk, your identity structures, your beliefs and value structures. All that stuff is running outside of awareness. And a developmental coach is going to be able to hold and mirror that back to you so that you can see it and inquire into it with you, and have the courage not to stop when it gets tough, because the personality doesn't like it when things get tough. When things get tough, people distract themselves, and that may well be an example of a developmental blind spot that gets in the way, that stops us from doing the work we need to do. And so whilst there is, reading, sitting, meditating, journaling, there are three, really big strings to the bow, but alone there's still not enough to truly facilitate and accelerate maturity and development unfolding in a purposeful way.
You've given us some absolute gems in the last 40 minutes. So let's say a company wants to work on their development, wants to work on looking inward. Where do they find the coaching room?
Thecoachingroom.com.au is the easiest way, and then drop us a message or give us a call, and we won't take anybody into coaching without them having first what's called an intake session, which is obligation free on both our parts. We'll have a conversation with you first, and if we think that you're ready for developmental coaching, we will progress to an intake session where, rather than us talking about it, you'll get to experience developmental coaching and our approach to human development firsthand.
Brilliant. Once again, Jay, thank you for your time. Thank you for your different perspective on using data and enhancing the culture of teams. I hope to speak to you again sometime and follow on from this conversation. Thanks very much.
Good, Johnny. Thank you very much. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to The Gamechanger. If you like this series, please rate and subscribe via Spotify or iTunes. If you want more information, please visit us at kitmanlabs.com, follow us on social, or contact us via science@kitmanlabs.com.